Good evening everyone. Welcome to our first virtual workshop. This is the workshop for March 2020 and the subject, as you can see there, is Shoot the Moon. Now the whole idea of this is to make your lunar imagery a bit easier for those of you novices, and for others maybe provide a couple of insights that will hopefully get people taking some great images of the moon. And of course now is a good time because we're coming into the full moon and then the waning moon to get some really good quality images moving forward. So as we get going, I want to start off discussing the equipment you're going to need. Now this will take a few minutes because I've got a couple of things that I want to flash up and show people, and I need to get those ready. But obviously, the camera is the starting point, but in lunar photography it's not the most important aspect. Any camera you've got will do within reason. Oh, and please don't mind Macro sitting on my shoulder, he's just enjoying a bit of time out of the cage. Really the key thing is a long focal length lens. So depending on the camera you have, if you have something like a hybrid, a Nikon P700 or 900, they have loads of zoom, up to 80 times, and are great for capturing real detail at a distance like of something of the moon. Downside is they only have very small sensors, and as a result they are very susceptible to movement. For interchangeable lens cameras, here we're talking about your average DSLRs and your mirrorless cameras, doesn't really matter which one you're using, whether it be entry level, mid-range or professional. The whole fact is you need a long focal length lens, and the longer the better. If you've just won Lotto, I would recommend something around the 600 or 800mm. If you haven't, whatever you've got, 300mm or longer. You can easily capture an image at 300mm. Yes, the moon won't be large in it, but you can crop it afterwards. But obviously if you've got something like a 400mm, that's better. Now if you're using a crop sensor on your camera, remember to take the crop factor into account. In this sort of instance it is your friend. Using a crop sensor on a Nikon with a 1.5 crop factor makes your lens equivalent to 450mm if you're using a 300. So you're going to get closer effectively than somebody on a full frame camera. If you're on a Canon with a 1.6 crop, you actually get 480mm. Sorry. So get even closer still. Now whilst this is an advantage, and it's nice to know at this point, it is something you need to take into account when you're trying to take the images. But they're not the only sort of lenses. What I want to do here is just bring across a couple of images for you to have a look at. So here's an image of a Nikon, effectively a kit lens. It's a 300mm. I think it's slightly better than a kit lens because it's an f4. This lens on a Nikon, very capable of taking your images. This one here, many of you with a Canon kit with the short and long focal length will recognise this lens. It's the standard 75 to 300 f4 to 5.6. This lens will work really well. You will be able to get images of the moon on your camera. You just have to take a little bit of time and a little bit of patience. Now when I was talking about the using the Lotto winnings, that would be for lenses like the one I'm just trying to find. This little beauty here, and I'll just enlarge it so you can see it. This is the Canon 200 to 400 f4. 400mm f4, great for lots of light and getting a good image of the moon. But at the back here you have a 1.4 converter built in. which takes it up to 560. And on top of that, you can actually add another 1.4 converter on extra, and it takes up to around 700. This lens is beautiful, but it's about $12,000, hence the lotto requirement. But at the end of the day, whilst that will take an image, the kit lens will as well. It is down to you having the time and patience and understanding some of the limitations. So, equipment 2. The moon is normally bright enough that, believe it or not, you can hand hold the shot. At full moon, you can point your long lens up and take a shot handheld, and the chances are it will come out quite well. Great. However, there's nothing to stop you using a tripod, and it does give you more flexibility. If you do use a tripod though, remember to use a self-timer or remote shutter. There's nothing worse than setting up on a tripod, having everything stable, and then smashing the shutter release button and introducing your own vibration that makes your picture look awful. Self-timer or remote shutter so that you can control it. Now, if you only have a kit tripod, these are the ones that you get when you go to Hardly Normal or JB Hi-Fi and pick up a camera kit. These are very weak. The legs are very narrow, and they do induce a lot of vibration at the slightest breeze or breath of air. The trick here is to keep it as low as possible. The lower the better, and that will give you the stability. Yes, it may mean you have to get down a bit lower to frame the image, but it's better that than having movement in the image. Now, the other thing with any tripod is try not to use the center column to gain extra height. It can feel nice to wind it up and think it's at eye height and I can just go ahead and shoot, but the center column is the weakest point for losing stability, so please don't use that. Now, for ultimate stability, if you're using a DSLR, you can use the mirror lockup. This is a function you set in the menu, and when you press the button the first time, the shutter button the first time, what you get is the mirror just popping up. Now, this is quite a violent movement and can introduce shake. So what you can do then is wait a few seconds for the shake to die down, press the shutter button again, and it's only the shutter that then moves. So you've reduced the bulk of what is going to introduce any movement in your image. Again, it's not necessary all the time, but it is another function that can increase the stability of the image you're trying to take. And when you're taking pictures of the moon, it really does come down to stability being a major factor. Now, just to give you an idea, here's the El Cheapo tripod. They can usually tell them because they've got very thin legs, and they've usually got these heads with them with a single arm that allows you to move it around, and they have these bracing legs in the middle, and these bracing legs are there to give you extra stability but don't really do that much. Over here on the other side is a higher quality tripod. Downside is it probably costs 20 times as much as the cheap one. Upside, your camera's not going to move, and that's the big difference. Key facts, whilst my dog is barking in the garden because she wants to be let in. There's a couple of key facts to consider when you're shooting pictures of the moon. The first one is that the moon is actually 287,000 kilometres roughly away from where you are. Your vantage point looking up at it, 287,000 kilometres. That's not just round the corner. The result of that is your depth of field will actually not be an issue. Depth of field is something you can completely ignore when it comes to taking pictures of something that far away. Give you an idea, at f2.8 and on a 400mm lens, your depth of field is roughly 3 kilometres to infinity. That kind of covers that range, and that's at f2.8. That's most L lenses or professional lenses wide open. At the other end, if you've got an f5.6 300mm kit lens, your depth of field is roughly 2.7 kilometres to infinity at your f5.6. Again, depth of field is not your issue. So when people start saying, oh, you must use f11 or f16 because the moon is so big and so far away, rubbish. Use whatever f-stop you feel comfortable at. The wider the better. Sometimes a stop down from the widest gives you a slightly crisper image, so use that. So do not worry about depth of field, worry more about focus. Now, the other advantage here of being able to keep your aperture open is that it means your sensor is going to receive more light. By receiving more light, it means your ISO can be kept a bit lower, which means you're going to be improving the quality of any image that you take. So this key fact really does give you some advantages. Fact 2. Due to the moon's orbit and the rotation of the Earth, the moon moves across the sky. We all see it going from east to west. But as a rough guide, the moon moves its own diameter across the sky in 3 minutes. So you look at the moon, you see the diameter of it, 3 minutes it will have moved that distance across the sky. So it's actually not moving slowly, and this has an impact on your image. It's a moving subject. Moving subjects, in order to capture them still, need a faster shutter speed. You're also using a longer focal length, so movement is more exaggerated within a longer focal length lens. You can get away with a slower speed on a 50mm aperture lens than you can on trying to take the same type of picture with a 300mm. So shutter speed becomes important. When it comes to the moon, your shutter speed should be the faster of either the reciprocal rule, which is 1 over the focal length of your lens. So if you're using a 300mm lens, your minimum shutter speed should be 1/300th of a second. Yes, lenses have image stabilizing, and manufacturers are very keen to say that their image stabilization can do 3 or 4 stops of stabilization. I wouldn't trust it that far. Maximum 1 or 2 stops. So instead of using 1/300th on a 300mm lens with IS, I might go down to 1/160th and say I'm okay. The other alternative is to set your minimum to 1/160th of a second. That is the minimum speed to capture the moon static moving across the sky. So you don't want to go any slower than that. If you're using a really long lens, 500, 600 or more, then you may want to actually increase it even further and say your minimum is 1/200th. But for an average shot by an average shooter using a standard style of lens, 1/160th is about the minimum. So you've got 2 options there, 1/160th or 1 over the focal length of your lens. Now if you are hand holding, 1 over focal length becomes very important. If you're not hand holding, if you're going to use a tripod, then 1/160th becomes important. But remember, if your lens is on your tripod, turn off IS, because the movement of the stabilizing lenses inside the lens itself can introduce movement. So it's better to switch that off. But there's your speed limits. So when do we shoot the moon? Well, any time it's in the air, in the sky, is the obvious answer. Daylight, nighttime, whenever you want. But there are some very, very good times when you will get better quality images. Moonrise and moonset. These are great because the moon appears just above the horizon, so you can have foreground interest. You can have hills and mountains or buildings in the background. And the moon often appears larger due to atmospheric light diffraction and has an almost orange tint to it, so it can look really good against those images. I do think I've got an image here, if you just give me a second. Sorry, just stopping the dog barking. Here's one taken just after moonrise, and you can see how it's bright orange, and we have the reflection down here. Much larger than it normally looks when it's high in the sky, so it can be a very nice time to picture it and get detail. Just close that one. When the moon is overhead is another good time. The higher it is in the sky, the less atmosphere you're shooting through. When the moon is on the horizon, you're looking over the horizon through the atmosphere, so you've got a lot more atmosphere in the way of your image. When it's overhead, you're looking straight up just through the minimum of atmosphere, and especially in hot weather, that can make the image look a lot clearer and more crisp. So it's another good time to shoot the moon. The other thing, believe it or not, is it's best when it's not a full moon. Catching the new moon or the last phase of the waning moon is quite difficult because there's not much light coming from the moon, so it takes a bit longer. Capturing the full moon, you tend to just have a disc, and whilst you get some relief in the disc, you don't tend to get as much as can be achieved at other times. The best time is when it's either waxing or waning, gibbous moon, or between new moon and full moon, or full moon and no moon. The reason for that is the 3/4 moon gives you plenty of light, but it also gives you more detail. Now that detail is actually seen along the terminator, and it gives a much more interesting feel to the image than just seeing the flat disc. The reason being, along that terminator you get shadows, and those shadows give a more 3D feel and give depth to the valleys, the mountains and the craters that you can see on there. Now, for those that don't know, the terminator is the edge of the moon where it is masked by the Earth's shadow. So if I get another image, you just have to give me a bit of time because I'm having to pull these images up from areas. So here we have the phases, new moon, and when it's a little slither down here, very great to capture, does take a bit of time, takes a bit of experience. Waxing crescent, first quarter and gibbous, those are great times. And you see this line here where it's in the shadow. This is the terminator, and this is where you get the best detail. Full moon, you just have a disc, so you don't tend to get as much detail, but again back here you do get the additional detail. So the 3 days when the moon is full, whilst it is great to photograph it and it is a really good place to start, try it 3 or 4 days later and just have a look at the difference in the detail you get along here. Back to here. So as I said, this area gives more detailed craters and mountains. Now I believe, have an image that might show that, so just give me another second. No. This one will do. So here we have an image taken at 3/4 moon, and here we have one taken at full moon, and here you can see the difference. In this one here, the full moon, you've got a lovely disc, you've got the big eye, you've got the spray out of all the rocks, you've got lovely pictures of the seas on the moon, and there is some nice detail in there. But when you look at this picture on the left, look at how much more detail is coming through in the craters and the mountains and the valleys as you get towards the terminator. And this is what I'm talking about. This is the area that really stands out when you're taking those images. and that's the time you really want to be looking at. But first time starting, try the full moon. Everybody wants to get a full moon picture. Go out and get one. Try this and get one. Let me just get rid of those. So, just to give you a pictogram of what we're talking about with the atmosphere, here down the bottom in green we have the Earth, and here surrounding it, kind of, we have the atmosphere, and then above that we have the void of space leading up to the moon. And here we have you, currently in your back garden, with your camera and your long lens, looking up at the glorious full moon we have tonight. And here we have moonrise. Now you can see here that you're looking all the way across the horizon, then you're looking through the atmosphere, and then you're getting to the moon. Here we have the moon overhead. Here you're just going straight through the atmosphere overhead and through to the moon. And you can see here there's a lot less atmosphere to go through. Now the atmosphere, especially when it's warm, and we do happen to live somewhere where it's quite warm, the atmosphere can introduce haze and rippling that can make the moon just look a little bit softer than you would like. Colder evenings are better, but you make do with what you can and you shoot. If it's high in the sky, sort of from here to here, you can usually get a pretty good image, and you can still make use of the images here. And you can see more atmosphere, less atmosphere, moon appears larger, moon appears brighter. So at no point in its arc can you actually say, these are the settings I need, these will work every time. It's always different, it's always based on those settings and a rough guide to what those settings are. And of course looking at the results and making adjustments. The other side of it is moon set, and that's similar to moon rise, but it's on the western coast. And here in WA, if you get the chance to go down the beach, which I know is difficult at the moment, but if you get the chance to go down the beach and capture the moon at moonset, it is a really, really lovely image and well worth the effort. Now the key thing here is to set your camera to manual mode. We don't want it in auto or aperture or shutter mode, because your camera's light meter will be fooled. Your actual target, the moon, is very bright because it's reflecting all the sunlight that's hitting it. However, the camera's meter will misread it because the camera sees it as just a white blob in a void of black. The camera's meter then tries to convert everything to a neutral grey and ends up overexposing the image, and you end up with a white blob on a black background, which is not what we're after. Setting your camera to manual allows you to control both aperture and the shutter speed and set it to where you need it. On auto, in some instances, even if you underexpose by 3 stops, your image will still be too bright, so it's much better to be on manual mode. Now you can use autofocus to focus on the moon, and it's usually a good idea. It's fairly easy to do because there is a lot of contrast between the white and the black. But once focused on it, just set the focus to manual. You don't want it to keep readjusting every time. You know it's right, set it to manual and use it from there. The best place to focus on is the body of the moon in an area of craters with good contrast. So if I go back and get the image of the full moon, there we go, and bring that back over, you can see here that we've got quite a few areas with good contrast. Now if you think of this being a ball, this is the closest point, this is kind of midway, and this is, we want all of this in focus. We've already proven depth of field is not an issue, but if you focus on here, you know this area is going to be spot on. Now you can focus on the terminator. That, if I get the one of the other images, if you remember, the terminator is this area. So this area here. There you get really good contrast, and that again is a very good place to focus on. The third area would be just on the edge. You can see, grey to black. There's good contrast there. Any of those will work, and your depth of field is not going to be an issue. It's just in a scale of which one's best, somewhere around here, somewhere around the terminator, and then finally just on the edge of the moon. They will all work, just one is slightly better than the other. So the other thing, whilst you're using a long lens, the one thing I didn't mention back then is you can put converters on, 1.4 or 2 times converters. These are very good for increasing your focal length. The downside is they take away stops of light. Something like a kit lens at f5.6 with a 2 times converter will end up being around about f11, and your camera will not focus automatically at f11. If you've got a 2.8 lens or an f4 lens and you put a 1.4 converter, you'll go to roughly f8. Now at f8 a lot of cameras will focus, things like the 5D and the 1DX in the Canon series and the equivalents in Nikon will focus at f8, but a lot of cameras won't. So again, you'd have to use focus manually, but if you want to try autofocus, it can work if there is a really good contrast, but it will only tend to work off the center focus point. So whatever you're doing, try and use the center focus point as it's the most sensitive. If you still can't get it to focus, then it's a case of going into live view and adjusting the focus manually. So go into your live view on your camera, zoom your picture in as much as you can, and then focus manually to the best of your ability before taking the shot. There you go for the focus. Now set your aperture wide open. This allows the maximum light into the sensor. Now if you know that you have a lens that is soft at its wide open, which can happen, then take it down a third of a stop or something just to help alleviate some of that softness, but you want to be as wide open as you can. Okay, so now you've sorted out your aperture, the next thing is your shutter speed, and as we said before, set your shutter speed to 1/160th of a second or faster. If you're on a tripod, we can start at 1/160th of a second, but don't forget to take account of the focal length of your lens when considering shutter speed. And this is the point at which you need to remember, if you're using a crop sensor, that you have to take account of the crop factor. So your 300mm lens might be a 450 or a 480. So your minimum shutter speed would be 1/450th or 1/480th, 1/500th. Allowing for IS, image stabilization, you may be able to drop it down a little bit, but be aware. If you are using a speed less than 1 over your focal length, use a tripod and self-timer remote. Why make life difficult? Stick it on tripod, get the self-timer remote out, and take your pictures then. You'll have more flexibility, and you'll have the stability. And from this point, you need to set your ISO as low as possible. 100 is ideal, especially if you're on a tripod at 1/160th of a second. But you may have to increase the ISO to ensure your shutter speed meets the speed requirements if you are hand holding. So again, it's a good reason to use a tripod. Once you've done all of that, so you've focused, you set your focus to manual, your camera's on manual, you've set your aperture, you've set your shutter speed, and you've set your ISO. The next thing to do is adjust your framing. You have to adjust your framing because by the time you've set everything up, the moon will have moved across the sky. So you have to reset your framing. This is one of the reasons to do manual focus and then lock it. Oh, now I have dogs barking. Once you've adjusted your framing and you're ready for the shot, snap away. Remember, as you're snapping away, that you may need to position your camera so that you get the correct composition, because the moon is moving. Dogs. And there's the images again. You can see full moon, the terminator of the moon, and here's the terminator. And what I've done a bit of colour graduation on this one, which is nice to do, but it's really something for another workshop. So maybe I'll try and record another workshop going through Lightroom and Photoshop, just to show how to colour tone a lunar image and make it look just a little bit more dramatic. So at that point, it's any questions. Now obviously if we were in the grapevine, you'd be able to just turn around and ask me questions at any point and we'd answer them like we normally do. Not quite so easy when you're just watching a video. So what I would suggest is watch this video, pause it, save it, watch it again, do whatever you want. If you've got any questions, go onto the club Facebook page. That's the big dog. Dante. Go onto the club Facebook page, post your question there. I will answer any questions raised, and everyone can then see the questions and answers, which means that everybody gets to gain from the question. The other thing is that if you have an answer to a question that's been raised, put your answer up there. Let's all help each other through and get some images of the moon. Now the last thing I would say is that it's a full moon tonight, and I'm pretty sure if you go outside and follow the directions of the workshop, you'll be able to get a couple of good images. And what would be great is if you go outside, either handheld or with tripod, take some images, do some basic editing on them, and post them on the club Facebook site so that everybody can see how you're doing. I'll probably go and do the same in about an hour, take a few images and then throw them up on the website, on the Facebook page, and let's see how we're all doing. And don't forget, this should all be helpful for next month's competition, because next month the competition is all about taking pictures of the moon. So get out there, enjoy and take some images, and I look forward to seeing anything you've got. Cheers all.